These fantasy playoffs are getting wild. Whether you're missing out now on David Montgomery or you have Alvin Kamara that went down with an injury, don't worry. I have plenty of options for you that you need to must start this week if you're still fighting for a fantasy championship in week 16. So kick back, relax, grab your favorite snack, grab your favorite beverage. I know I got mine right here. And let's roll the intro. The first player we must be starting this week in week 16, especially if you're fighting for a playoff spot, and even more especially if you're fighting to not be last place, is Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns. Now, it is very unfortunate that Nick Chubb had to suffer a broken foot injury. They don't know if he's going to need surgery yet. It may be a short recovery time for him, but one thing we do know, he's not playing Sunday, so get him out of your lineups. And Jerome Ford, he's got this sweet, juicy chef's kiss matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals, and we saw what Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard were able to do to them last week. They both found the end zone. And Cincinnati is 25th in fewest fantasy points allowed to running backs this season. So in other words, they give up the 8th most fantasy points allowed to running backs. You see what I'm trying to get to? I don't think it's crazy at all for what could potentially have been a waiver wire pickup for you this week could actually exceed and become a top 20 running back play this week. And if you couldn't get your hands on Jerome Ford, I believe Alexander Mattison is a strong play this week against the Jacksonville Jaguars. After just a week ago, me claiming that Alexander Mattison is droppable, somehow, some way, Sincere McCormick does suffer an injury, which is extremely unfortunate. He was having a little good stint of a run for the Vegas Raiders. But now it's back to an absurd amount of volume going to Alexander Mattison. No, it might not be the most efficient way to disperse the volume, but he's going to get a ton of carries. And if he falls in the end zone, it makes it all worth it. And if you can't play either one of those running backs, Kendre Miller is a player you could start, but I personally would stay away from it, as we just saw last week the Green Bay Packers shut down Zach Charbonnet regardless of the quarterback situation. Very unfortunate that Geno Smith got hurt, but even when Geno Smith was healthy, the run game really couldn't get going all that much. The Packers give up the 11th fewest fantasy points allowed to running backs, so I would stay away, but if you're desperate and you need to play him, you can start him. Now let's shift the focus to the wide receiver position. I feel like I have not spoken about this name on the channel very much this year, other than one video early on before the season started, and that's T. Higgins. So welcome to the party, T. Higgins. You're finally being talked about on this video, and you gotta start him this week. Even though his teammate and guy that plays across the other side of the field is going for the NFL Triple Crown in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns, T. Higgins is a must-play this week as the Cleveland Browns give up the 6th most fantasy points allowed to wide receivers this year. If you drafted him and you somehow made the playoffs, it's been a rough ride, but now the time has come to absolutely trust T. Higgins in your fantasy lineups. Maybe you traded for him and you got him for the cheap, whatever the case may be. T. Higgins has been rolling over the last few weeks, and now he has a great matchup and should propel you into the fantasy championship round. Another wide receiver that could pay off massively this week is DeAndre Hopkins of the Kansas City Chiefs, who's going up against the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans give up the 4th most fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. I'm not worried or concerned any bit about Patrick Mahomes and his playing status, and even if he was to come out of this game, Carson Wentz can throw the deep ball. Let's not forget. No matter who's under center, no matter what the case may be, this is a great matchup for DeAndre Hopkins. If you have him, be playing him with confidence. And lastly, this one really depends on whether his starting quarterback is going to play or not. The defense he's going up against gives up the 3rd most fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. We saw them get cooked on Monday night by Keenan Allen, and that's DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks, who's going up against the Minnesota Vikings this week. Now, the reason I didn't mention Jackson Smith-Njigba as must start, because no matter who's playing under quarterback, you can start JSN with confidence. Unfortunately, if you're a DK Metcalf owner, I cannot say the same thing. DK Metcalf needs Geno Smith to play this week to unlock his full potential. We saw what it was like with Sam Howell under center. Even if they play Jaron Hall, I do not like DK Metcalf, even though it's a plus matchup. But if Geno gives it a go, even if he's 50%, even if he's 40%, I don't care. You got to put DK Metcalf in your lineups this week. I don't care that he hasn't scored a touchdown since like October or even late September, whatever the case may be, DK Metcalf has to be put in your lineup if Geno Smith is under center. And fortunately, if you're a JSN owner, you don't need to worry about who's playing under center. You know you're going to get a ton of volume and a ton of opportunities from JSN, and that's why he's just a lock to start. For tight ends, Pat Freiermuth must be started this week, and it's not because of a great matchup. It's because he's been absolutely on fire lately, scoring touchdowns in all 3 of his last 3 games, and he has 4 touchdowns over his last 6 games. So this is a guy you can trust to find the end zone this week. The floor for Pat Freiermuth isn't very high. And no, the ceiling is definitely not that high. But if you could just get him in the end zone, you have a great chance of winning and moving on to your championship rounds. And the Ravens give up the 15th most points to the tight end position this year. So no, it's not a you gotta start him just off of the matchup, but it's definitely not a bad one either. Kind of write it off as a neutral script here. And in neutral scripts and neutral situations, we want to start guys that are talented, guys that know how to get themselves open, and have a great rapport with their quarterbacks. And I think Pat Freiermuth checks the box on all 3 of those. But someone that has a great matchup this week and should be started is Jake Ferguson of the Dallas Cowboys. The Tampa Bay Bucs secondary is cooked, chat. And they give up the 8th most fantasy points allowed to tight ends this year. I'm going out on a ledge here. I'm going to predict that Rico Dowdle finally cools off. He can't run for 100 yards every single game, though he's looked pretty good. I would say that the Dallas passing offense has to get going here. So if you're desperate and you needed a quarterback, I would put Cooper Rush in that kind of category as well as a player you should be starting if desperate. And before I go over some kind of like injury news, what teams and what groups of players we're upgrading or downgrading, let's just briefly go over some kicker and defense matchups. I absolutely love both the Buffalo Bills and Green Bay Packers, whether it's the kicker, whether it's the defense. Start all of those guys, Tyler Bass, Brandon McManus, and start the defenses as well because they should be showing out. But let's move on and talk about some injuries and who we're upgrading and downgrading due to maybe changes at the quarterback, maybe injuries at the quarterback position. I kind of sprinkled that in a little earlier, talking about if Geno Smith don't play, got to take DK Metcalf out of your lineup. First, let's talk Kansas City Chiefs. I spoke about that a little bit briefly before when I said DeAndre Hopkins must be started. I don't see a scenario where Patrick Mahomes doesn't play this weekend. Sure, it might be the safe thing to do. We've seen Patrick Mahomes play on a bum ankle, and we've seen Patrick Mahomes light it up on a bum ankle, mind you. So I don't think this injury is going to stop him. He was at practice on Monday. He is probable currently. He doesn't even have a questionable tag right now. Patrick Mahomes, Kansas City Chiefs, if you have Travis Kelce, you have Xavier Worthy, DeAndre Hopkins, I'm not worried about any of those guys. We'll find out a little bit more, unfortunately, after this video comes out about Geno Smith's health and whether he's going to play or not. If I had to predict now, it seems like he's going to play. So that means I'm putting DK Metcalf in my lineups this week. But if he's a no-go, I'm going to pull him out and try to grab somebody off waivers and hope for the best. I'm not taking a chance on Metcalf getting just a couple targets, no red zone looks. I'm not buying it. Michael Penix Jr. is starting this week for the Atlanta Falcons. We have to upgrade Bijan Robinson in this situation. We've seen Bijan Robinson very lethal in terms of rushing and on-the-ground stats. He hasn't had the, explosive touchdowns that we expected him to have. Passes out of the backfield are going to be key in giving Michael Penix confidence to continue to be a starter in this league. So expect a lot of dump-offs for Bijan Robinson. The Browns have elected to start Dorian Thompson-Robinson over Jameis Winston. If you had Jerry Jeudy and you were riding that magical run, I'm sorry, but it's over for you. I'm downgrading all pass catchers in the Cleveland Browns offense, so I'm sorry David Njoku owners, I'm sorry Jerry Jeudy owners, and I'm sorry people who are desperate enough to even play Elijah Moore. And that's why I got Jerome Ford as a must-start play this week, because the running back room is going to be upgraded. And it looks like the Titans are going to make a change at quarterback. So if you were hoping on the Indianapolis Colts defense to get you like 4 takeaways, a defensive touchdown, I don't know if that's going to happen per se, especially if Mason Rudolph is under center, then you know you're going to get a very conservative script. I'm not saying he can't throw an interception, but he's definitely not as prone to turnovers as a Will Levis could be. So those are all my must-start players for this week. Obviously, there are some contingencies based on who's going to start at quarterback. I'm really sorry that I can't, break these down and make it into 2 videos. Just given the situation with my health currently, I'm not able to sit in this chair multiple times a week. For everyone that stuck around and supported this entire video, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. If you're new here and you like fantasy football content, make sure you subscribe down below, because I don't let injuries stop me to make these videos and pump out good content for you. And if you like this video, you like fantasy football content, feel free to smash that like button as well. Helps my videos get out to more and more fantasy football viewers like yourself. But if this is the last time you see me before Christmas, I just want to say Merry Christmas to every single one of you. Everyone have a happy holidays. My name is Turtle. This is Outlier Fantasy, and I will see you in the next video.